Well, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are in the world. Thank you for joining us on our much publicized webcast, New GRC Perspectives. This has challenged us to think about refreshing some of the stagnant thinking and processes we've had and work out where we need to improve our activities here. I'm Dan French, founder and CEO of Consider Solutions. I know many of you. I've been running this firm for 18 years now. I'm very pleased to have with me Hans van Ness, our Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Hans.
Hello, Dan.
As you can see from those photographs, we've been around the block a few times, and apart from the fact we probably could have lived healthier lives, we have picked up a fair bit of experience on the way. Not just from ourselves, but our customers. Today I'm in Seattle and Hans is in London, so we've got two dimensions of the world, and maybe that'll add also something to the dimensions we're going to share with you. As we go through this, we do want you to ask questions. So there is a panel on your GoToWebinar interface. Please ask questions as you go, because that makes the whole experience richer for everybody. If you have any technical problems, use the same panel and someone will help you. In terms of context of myself and Hans and the team behind us, those of you who work with us know about our world-class finance focus. This is kind of an aspiration that many organizations have, how to get to the finance and, if you like, the one office operations of the future. And our perspective on world-class finance is helping to drive better business results, reducing the cost of operations, optimizing cash flow, and managing risk better. And if you see the temple on the right, the pillars of financial control and compliance, which is all about classic internal controls over financial reporting as one element of risk, broader risk assurance, everything from fraud, bribery, data privacy, and an umbrella of enterprise risk management. And on the right-hand side, financial process optimization, which is helping the organization drive the performance that gives better business results. It's quite coincidental, or perhaps not, that some of the discussion we have today is about bringing these things together and having a holistic view of how to drive principal performance. All of that obviously based on technology and data, without which you can't make the progress we need to. So that's the context. A lot of what we're going to share with you is not our own ideas. It's come from the clients around the world we work with. These are some of the global influences. You'll recognize many of these brands. But we, through 18 years of hard work and experience and interaction and collaboration, we developed some opinions and some best practices, and a lot of it is actually thanks to these folks. So those are names you recognize. So let's have a look at the agenda. This is what we're going to cover. That's an introduction, if you didn't realize. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's the context for having this conversation at all. And then we're going to look at specific challenges in current thinking and practice in governance, risk management, and controls and compliance. And then talk about whether there's a case for action for alter course, because we know not necessarily we need to change things. Let's have a look at the cornerstones of what's new, how to harness the best of what we have, look at some potential actions, and then come back with a Q&A. So do ask some questions as we go through. That'll be excellent. And to start off, I'm going to get you involved, because not only are we around the world, I know you're all over the world, and also in different roles. So I want to ask you a quick question just to help inform the discussion today. And this is all anonymous, but you'll get the feedback on the kind of the general responses to these. So what's your primary role? This should be fairly easy. If you fulfill multiple ones, just choose the primary one. It's a single choice. Are you an internal audit, risk management, internal controls, regulatory compliance, or some other role? If I get loads of others, and I realize I haven't given a good selection. So please give that a go. 10 seconds. It shouldn't take you very long to work that out, I hope, unless, of course, it's the middle of the night, wherever you are. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at what we got. So interestingly, oh, this is right down the middle. So pretty much even splits between internal audit, risk management, internal controls, regulatory compliance, but of course, other as well, which could be a lot of things. Could be consultants. I probably need to dig more into that, but that's kind of interesting and not surprising. We've got a broad view of this. Okay, thanks very much indeed. So what has been going on? So I don't think it's any surprise that we all know we're going through some seismic generational shifts. Ever since I've been in business, people have talked about the fact that change is the only constant, which is a bit of kind of motherhood and apple pie. But if you look at what's going on now, the organizations we work with, even our own lives, are going through massive changes. I talk the disruption piece, I talk a lot about the Uberization of business, where businesses are moving, traditional large organizations which might have a business-to-business approach are moving rapidly to implementing business-to-consumer models because consumers demand so much. And Uber is a great example of where we've moved to a place where consumer intimacy is really important and ease of working. So everything in our ecosystem is changing, and the catalysts are clearly technology, yes, but I think mobility itself and data, volume and transparency of data that we all have as consumers, and thus as organizations we need to respond to and manage and deal with, and the speed and depth of change. That's a massive shift. You know, many of the organizations on this call are moving to a more intimate consumer focused model. Just this week I was talking to large consumer goods firm who would typically deal with distribution channels. They're going B2C as well. So while all this is going on, we still have to drive down costs, cycle times, and eliminate negative consequences and do all the good stuff. But what is really interesting, and you don't have to look at many news articles to realize that now there is an expectation that the what isn't enough. The how we achieve our results is important as what we achieve. So it's no longer good enough to drive outstanding financial results. The view now is stakeholders and shareholders want principled performance. They want performance with reputation. And that's now a team game. We can't even do this within our four walls. Our supply chain partners, our customer partners all matter. So that's a kind of a big contextual shift about how we might think about governance, risk management, and compliance. And then visually, here's just a kind of nice collection of visuals that kind of reinforce some of that. The globalization piece in the top right, the fact we've been driving down cost of operations, the focus in the top left, and, driving down cost of financial operations through automation, standardization, simplification, shared services, the focus on financial performance and on risk, and the changing nature of risk, and of which we all know a lot about. Technology itself is creating some of the risks, and that little picture on the bottom right is a business email compromise email that our CFO got, purporting to be from me, asking for international banking details and how much cash we had on hand. So it's hitting us all. So one more, another question for you. Risk management. So GRC is the essence of managing risk. So what is the biggest risk management in your organization you have today? And unfortunately, we only got 5 options in these polls, and I would love to give you a lot more. And one of them has to be another. So can you work out whether, just give me your thoughts about whether the biggest issue you have is stakeholder management alignment around risk management in the organization, or the complexity of the business and technology environment in which you operate in, lack of resources or funds, or the challenges in providing actionable risk insight to business stakeholders so they can take action, or some other issue. This is all just kind of help inform the discussion and inform some of our feedback to you. So have a think about that. Your biggest risk management challenge, is it one of the top 4 or is it something else? 10 seconds, hopefully it won't take too long, but please do this. It's useful, hopefully to you. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's have a look at the old scoreboard. So, right, interesting. So by far the biggest, just under half of you find the complexity of business and technology environment a major point. It does look like I did well with the 4 choices because there's very few others. Followed by actionable risk insight, stakeholder management, and that's good. A lack of resources and funds kind of is, sometimes we use that as an excuse for not being able to articulate the value of what we're trying to do, but that's really helpful. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'm now going to ask Hans to talk us through some of the challenges we've identified with our clients and the top 8. Hans, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we have observed over the last years some challenges with the current GRC thinking and practices, and we have tried to group them into 8 main topics. By all means, those topics are not completely isolated from each other, and you see, of course, combinations of them or causal relationships between them. And I will go over them one by one. The first challenge that we see is that a lot of the initiatives around GRC were originally issue-driven. Of course, SOX from a compliance perspective, or FDA regulations from a product perspective, fraud investigations because something happened in your organizations, or maybe lately GDPR-driven privacy elements that led you to start an initiative. All fine, and they all aim and have achieved the resolving of the issue at hand, but they were not aligned with other initiatives around. So what we see a lot is that questions appear, hey, we have 4 or 5 initiatives, what is the source of truth in here, and don't we are doing double work or making double costs in running those things in parallel from an issue point. A little step further is the challenge around ownership, objectives, and performance measures. We symbolize this with this picture showing 2 lighthouses, and you know a lighthouse is a means to guide you to your target and to illuminate the outcome of where you want to go or the direction that you want to go. The problem is that what we see a lot in organizations is that there are multiple lighthouses, and they all have their own targets, their own priorities, and sometimes are contradicting themselves or even deliver counterproductive KPIs, whereby the first lighthouse looks more for efficiency and the other lighthouse looks more for effectiveness. A danger, and again a waste of potential resourcing. Also, an observation that we made is the negative connotation around many GRC initiatives. Admin overhead is so often heard, and we have put down a few quotes here in the same order of magnitude and the same that we have heard. It sounds if nobody sees the value of the initiatives, or that could also be the reason we are not communicating the business value of these initiatives, being a required insurance thing or delivering potential better value to the organization itself. So not seeing the why, what, and how of the various initiatives leads to seeing only the burden and not the value. Challenge number 4, judgment-based. A lot of the GRC implementations that we have seen are largely judgment-based. Yes, they are supported by IT reports and data, but there is a lot of judgment around, and that can work fine if you have a risk assessment with a cross-functional group. That can be very effective, but the vast majority of assessments are self-assessments or are local or functional ones, and they lead inevitably to subjective results and compromising factors. Hey, you say left, I say right, let's go for the middle one, and that really helps. Or even worse, I'm getting a bit tired of this to think about it, let's copy and paste last month's response for this month. So instead of going for the continuous monitoring that we are looking for, we are going often for a continuous opinion way of working. Stovepipe implementations, of course, related to often the issue-driven start of many of the initiatives. The implementations, system-wise or procedural-wise or otherwise, tend to be stovepipes. driven by a part of the organization, going for a certain aim and a certain technology, and they are at best loosely coupled. This gives, of course, all kinds of issues like different topologies that are used by the stovepipes, overlapping elements, and in fact what we're doing is symbolized by the two pictures to the left and the right of this slide. We are thinking inside the maze for our personal stovepipe to get out, whereby we lose the more helicopter view that we need to make sure that we find the most logical way out of the total maze for the organization. And inevitable challenge 6, we have to put up our favorite picture that many of you have seen if you have followed our other webinars, but it is still so relevant. It is about the control thinking versus risk management. For those who haven't seen it, this is a very old picture. You can see it from the cars in the background, old cars, of a car park, which symbolizes the system and the process in the organization. There is a barrier put in front of it that allows only authorized access. You have to put in your card in the slot, otherwise you can't get in. So that is the security part of it. And there is a monitoring part also, because every month there is a automatically generated report that shows who went in and out using which cards. So beautiful and absolutely great to monitor what you were planned to do, and that is closing off this car park. Then it snowed, and you see by the tire tracks that reality can be more stubborn and people can be more intelligent than the systems they have to work with. So from a risk perspective, it's not only you have to monitor what is planned, but also look for the unplanned reality. Goal-oriented project mindset. In the vast majority of GRC initiatives that we have seen, we have found a very large focus on the issue resolving. And again, when you are an issue-driven initiative, that is not illogical. And of course, those implementations, those projects run longer than you think, are more costly than you think, are more complex than you think. And before you know it, you are scrambling on to the finish, happy that you have resolved the requirements set out for the project, and you forget that day plus one, things start to deteriorate. If you don't embed the good work you did in your project in business as usual, it will not be picked up, and the deterioration of the results will go on quicker than you think. Last but not least, challenge 8, technology. A lot of technology has been poured around GRC initiatives over the last few years, promoted, hyped as replacing all the technology, things like robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., etc. All being presented as the next best thing to sliced white bread. But if you then start to use them in practice, maybe not so different, and in the end, maybe just still bread. So you go through this peak of inflated expectations and this trough of disillusionment, and then hopefully you have stamina enough, and in this case appetite enough, to try the bread again and find out that it is good natural bread and that it could be part of a very healthy diet. So maybe not the technology is always the best solution to get to the next step, but applying new technology can be wise, and if you apply it in a correct way, it can get to a productive stage.
Thanks, Hans. That's an interesting talk through the 8 big challenges, and it's certainly worth thinking that through. And I do wonder, actually, perhaps we should have given you a poll on how many of those challenges reflect your world, whether you have 1 or 8. and hopefully it's given you some food for thought. But on one element of that, the stovepipe discussion and the kind of the narrow tunnel vision that Hans described, when you think about in your organization, and this might require a little bit of thought, in your organization, how many applications do you have that support governance, risk management, internal controls, compliance, and assurance? And including that, if you like, systematic use of, you know, generic technologies like Excel and portals and SharePoint and all the rest of it. How many applications do you think you have in use in the organization? And I suspect this isn't an easy question for many of you, but have a think. Do you think you're less than 3, between 3 and 5, 5 and 10, 10 to 20, or more than 20 applications? I'm going to give you 10 seconds for that. Give it the best stab you can. It's quite understandable that a lot of people, when asked this question, don't actually know. So give it your best stab, and after this webcast, you might want to go and do a little bit of an inventory. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Give it a go. Let's have a look. So interesting. Okay. So some of you are optimistic. A quarter of you are very optimistic that you have 3 or less applications in use. Well, I admire you if that is the case. A third of you have up to 5. A quarter of you have up to 10. 10% admit up to 20, and 5 or 6% admit more than 20. Now, that's really interesting. If this interests you, I do encourage you after this webcast, go and do a bit of a survey. Ask different people from different perspectives in your organization. I think you'll find out you have more than you think. But thanks, thank you very much for that. So while I think about it, do keep asking your questions. You've got a question panel. Ask questions. Want to get your feedback, want to get your input, and we'll deal with them at the end if we can. So, and if we can't, we're going to email the answers to you. So either way, we're going to respond. So our challenge then as leaders is, we know these 8 challenges. You may have additional ones, but we know what these 8 challenges are, and we know the frustrations they cause. But how do we go about adjusting course to make maximum progress in the environment we find ourselves in? So I quite like that sailing boat. So these are kind of 3 views about how you might consider how you might address those 8 challenges. There's 3 kind of balancing themes. And there's a bunch of complexity, as those of you with more than 3 applications will know, and I guess even those with 3, you feel this too. But there's 3 elements. One is the opportunity and the amount of change coming down the track towards your governance, risk management, compliance capability. If you have a high degree of change, new initiatives coming through, then that might sort of mitigate towards wanting to improve how you operate. The second piece about the value of your current processes, the current single source of truth in data and the systems. If those are high value and have proven to be resilient and adaptable to the pipeline of change, then that might mitigate against needing to change. And then, of course, cost of maintaining the current status, both in terms of process, organization, and systems. And of course, the more different approaches you have, the more costly that is. That also goes into the mix. So in terms of a balanced view, it's worth thinking about these 3 elements. How much change have we got coming down the pike? How many new initiatives, new regulations, new risks that are being identified, new things that we're expected to manage, new ways we're expected to manage, new ways of dealing with risk mitigation. All of that change coming down, and then how well does our current process, data, and system support us, and what's the cost of doing it? So that's definitely a key element. The other key element is organizational readiness. So how prepared is the organization, the stakeholders, for making change, either incremental or substantial? So 3 quotes here, but basically, is the organization ready for change? Is it ready to innovate, or would it rather be a laggard? And which laggard sounds pejorative, but that's actually often is a good place to be for all the reasons that Hans identified, with the peak of inflated expectations. And then change management. We all know about the Machiavelli quote. Most of us actually do, because we're busy, we do find the current way of working, however frustrating, somewhat appealing, because it avoids us having to worry about all the change to working practices and organizations, all the rest of it. So this is the organization ready? And that's kind of a view. And the third piece is really about vision. Do you have a kind of a consensus around what the current state is. And these are two great images from OSEG. I do recommend you get the report that goes with this. This is about, for most organizations, with the between 3 and 40 applications on the left-hand side, applications and processes, no integrated view of risk, really, no ability to have effective oversight and governance because it's too many islands of risk and islands of risk management, and too many different ways of governing. So that's the left-hand side is a kind of the islands of risk management, if you like, and the right-hand side is a future state vision where you've got common oversight based on a single source of truth. Now, while strategically a single source of truth sounds great, it's important to recognize there is no single individual technology that's going to allow you to do that. So this is more about a vision and a roadmap and how you'd want to provide that. There isn't just that you can't buy a future state like that out of the box. But it's kind of interesting to work out whether or not you have that vision and how you'd apply that in the organization as stakeholders. So let's talk a little bit then. We've looked at the 8 challenges and we looked at kind of how you might consider change. Let's look at the cornerstones of new paradigm as we've kind of discussed and got input from clients and organizations we talk to around the world. So these are the 5 topics I'm going to talk about. We'll talk about them in a little bit in detail. So I'll move on to the first one, which is Cornerstone 1, business strategy and performance. Now, I mentioned principal performance earlier, and I think there's a massive growing groundswell of belief in business that it's important, critically important, to not just achieve the results, but to achieve them in a way that stakeholders find acceptable. So that the what has always been important, the what we produce in terms of business results, but how we do it is critical. And this is about business strategy and performance and risk management are all one discipline. So risk and opportunity are 2 sides of the same coin. We've been having this discussion for a number of years now, more years than I care to imagine. But if you think about everything in business and even in your personal life, in terms of making decisions that progress the state of the art, you're always looking at what are the opportunities and what can go wrong. Risk and opportunity are necessary bedfellows in making progress in business. Somehow or other, in business, we've kind of got into a bit of a habit of thinking risk management is somebody else's job and we've got a special department for that. Well, it makes no sense, really. I mean, risk oversight, yes, but risk management is everyone's job. So 2 sides of the same coin. We need to make sure that managers and leaders around the organization understand that we're all responsible for performance, we're all responsible for risk, we're all responsible for opportunity. And on the right-hand side, this idea of a balancing act, risk and opportunity, balancing on values, it's not enough just to say the value of the opportunity is Y and the cost in terms of risk is X. It's not just a financial judgment. The values of the organization determine what opportunities you will address and what risks you're prepared to take. So values is a key thing, and that's kind of part of the principal performance idea. So I think this is really grabbing executive attention, and it's starting to bring together these elements. So when it comes to implementation of that, enterprise risk management is the mechanism, the process. And I have to say, COSO has made great progress with a lot of help from other folks, from an old approach, which was very much classic risk management cube, which was a little bit similar to their internal controls thinking. And the new approach on the right absolutely reinforces what we've been saying for a number of years, is performance, risk, opportunity are all integrated. So this new approach starts with mission, values, vision, strategy and objectives, and risk management as a part of that, and risk appetite as a part of that, and driving principal performance. And I think this new COSO approach has really made enterprise risk management meaningful to executives. And I think the point about this is that risk management is about creating a culture where everybody factors risk into decision making. It's not somebody else's job. So I think that's a major step forward. And if you're not looking at the new ERM guidance, I suggest you do. So got another poll for you, just talking about enterprise risk management. What's your approach to this? Is it something that's new to you? Are you deeply engaged? So very simple. Do you regard yourselves as a mature global ERM implementation with global governance? Do you feel you're there, Or second, do you have an ongoing enterprise risk management implementation in line with perhaps with this latest COSO thinking? Or are you considering ERM implementation? We've got no plans for it. And this is not judgmental, and maybe very good reasons you don't want to do enterprise risk management. Or if you're unsure, which is also a perfectly reasonable response, let us know. So have a think about that. Hopefully give you some pause for thought, but should be fairly straightforward. Unsure is a valid answer. So you've got 10 seconds. Let's have a look at that. Let's see what we've got. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So just under half of you are have an ongoing enterprise risk management implementation. Really good. It's funny the way that color falls. It looks like you're doing our ERM implementation but not doing the latest COSO update, but that's all part of the same answer. About a quarter of you are considering ERM. None of you have no plans, which is great. And 16% of you are mature ERM. That's really good news. Unsure, all I suggest you do is you talk, socialize these concepts and work out where you stand. It's a very useful conversation. So, Cornerstone 2. The second cornerstone of the new GRC model, and Hans talked a lot about that project approach that we see causing so many problems for risk management and GRC in organizations. The critical thing is an end-to-end process focus. When we implement new GRC practices, new approaches to governance, new approaches to risk management, or new risk categories to deal with, and new ways of governance and assurance, we're implementing processes, or at the very least, we're refining processes. So we need to think about it as a process. And this is kind of quite relevant in the business now. A lot of organizations are looking at end-to-end processes in the key value delivery to customers, in the key supply chain, manufacturing, all this stuff. And this is giving rise to a discipline of global process ownership. And this is risk management, GRC is a global process. So you need to think about this from a global process ownership point of view. So this is, again, this is not all our ideas. This has come from our clients and work we've done over the past 5 or 6 years. These 9 themes, absolutely key. And you know what? It doesn't cost you anything. You can use this to stimulate conversation and consensus in your own organization. The key thing is for the process we're implementing, the risk management or policy management or internal controls process or integrated ERM process, what are the objectives and outcomes that the executive stakeholders want? What's the value we're going to create? Now that might seem really obvious, but in my experience, that's one of the hardest questions to answer. So it is a question of socializing this and starting to develop a common theme. So what's the outcome we want? Second piece, stakeholder management, everyone talks about it. But when you're looking at a process rather than a project, stakeholder management gets really interesting. You've got to work out, do we have all the stakeholders we need? Because sometimes the people who put their hands up to be a stakeholder aren't necessarily the people you need. So who do we need and how do we engage them and manage them? And also, what happens with stakeholders change? So this particular element came into stark relief with one of our clients when the CFO changed. The CFO retired, a new CFO came in, everything continued as before, and realized things were getting a bit, weren't moving as smoothly as they were before. I tried to work out what it was and trace it all back to the fact that the new CFO had come in. We hadn't validated as a collaborative group, hadn't validated with the CFO that the objectives, outcome, business value we were aiming for was still correct or aligned with his thinking. So what do you do when stakeholders change? You've got to have a process and a mechanism for dealing with it. So stakeholder management, critical, and an element of that is how do you measure and communicate progress in a process, not in a project, in a process. So how do we know that the process is delivering value? How do we know the process is refining and producing what the stakeholders expect and what the participants need from it? Then organization and governance. How do we organize ourselves around this process and how do we make decisions around it? Without this stuff, the process will just wither and die. The next piece is the process design itself. It might not be a brand new process, it might be a refined process, but we need to know what it is and we need to agree it and we need to understand the unintended consequences and all of the bad things that could happen as well as the good things that could happen. The next piece is process placement, sourcing and operation. So where does the process steps actually take place? Do they all happen in head office? Do they all happen in a risk management department? Do they happen out there in the field? Do they happen in internal audit? Well, obviously, if you're thinking about risk management that drives genuine action, it's got to be across the organization. So different parts are happening in every part of the organization. And obviously, we don't want to have a siloed approach. So this is where you want to think about the 3 lines of defense model. about, line 1 about operational management, line 2 about those who are actually managing the risk management and control process, and the third line being the independent assurance through audit. Got to think about where these things fit, and does it all make sense as we're implementing it. The next one is automation enabling technology. At last, we've got to technology, but it's only one of 9. And in my experience, I think our general experience is we spend far too much time in that box and not enough time in the others. Because when we solve the other problems, actually that one gets easier. Skills and capability. Do we have the skills and capability to deliver this process and execute this process well? And if not, how do we get there? How do we make sure we sustain it? Because people move around. And then business service management is how do we make sure this is delivering value as a service to the organization? How do we know the organization is getting what it needs? How do we know how to improve and how to optimize? So that's a continuous improvement piece. Those are 9 themes. I absolutely recommend you look at those in your own organization. So that's all very well, but if you're managing a process, you've got 2 things to worry about. You've got managing today and leading for tomorrow, because we're talking about continual change and continuous improvement. Now this, I like this. There's a very smart management thinker and guru, John Cotter, who wrote about this, and it's worth thinking about. How do I manage the mechanics of what goes on today and also establish direction and drive for the future and the change? This agile approach as well, in parallel with the robust decision-making approach. And Cotter talks a lot about these 2 models. And if you're lucky enough to have people that can do both, that's amazing. But quite often you need to blend these skills and individuals. But you need to think about it because we're talking about an agile, fast-moving world. Okay, third cornerstone, fact to act. Now this is a big discussion. Hans talked about the fact we have some situations where we think we're doing continuous monitoring, and actually what we've got is continuous documented opinion, which an opinion has value, but facts are worth a lot more. So on the left-hand side, you see this impossible waterfall where people think about risk, and I've got to have some risk mitigation strategies. It might be policies. I might implement some of that in controls. I've got to monitor the controls. And hopefully somebody's going to take some action on all of that. But the idea that this actually feeds back into risk assessment itself, whilst is true in principle, in many organizations, there's all disintegrated pieces. This waterfall is not even an impossible waterfall. It's a various selections of rapids and tributaries and diversions. So at the very least, we need to have thinking from risk, policy, control, monitoring, and action. And of course, it's not a hierarchy, it's a cycle, because the action we take needs to affect the risk itself and our view of the risk. So this idea on the right is critically important, this fact to act thinking. So if we can get facts, evidence from process operation in our businesses and drive that through into a virtuous circle, we've got a very powerful model. But fact to act is essential if you're going to drive effective risk management. So that gives us the cornerstone 4. So how do you get your facts? Well, facts come from data. And this is a wonderful quote, and it's some years old, but without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And that plays into lots of things. If you've got data, you can have an objective conversation. If you've got opinions, it becomes a subjective, heated conversation. So in every organizational change, process, implementation, thinking, conventional thinking, as it's about people, process, and technology. They've got to thank Gartner for this very simple picture, but I like this because now there's 4 platforms. Never address anything without thinking about data. It's absolutely essential. So we need to have risk analytics and continuous operational fact monitoring. So let's monitor the facts as indicated in our business. We're capturing data in all of the work we do now. How do we monitor that so we get really deep insight? From a high-level risk assessment point of view, how do the facts on the ground really tell us how our risk assessment really is, not just opinion? Obviously, we need to monitor for controls, and a lot of that is happening these days, but also the residual risk after mitigation strategies. How do we monitor the residual risk? There's evidence of facts in the organization we can pick from systems and data. And obviously, we talked in ERM, we're in a world now where risk and performance are 2 sides of the same coin, so we need to look at performance as well. So ultimately, we need to look at exceptions to what we expect in terms of risk and policy and control. So we know what should happen, but we need to know what actually does happen, and we need to know why. But once we know the what, we can get the why. So it's exceptions, but also trends and variances and how different organization units in our business are behaving and reacting. There's a pretty critical element there. So that's what we want to do. And here's just an example of some analytics from a source to pay process. And what's interesting here is you start to see the link between risk, opportunity, and performance. And some of these things, in terms of what's going on in the process, might look to be clearly performance related, and some things that actually look like high performance activities can actually hide some risks you're not aware of. So yeah, I mean, touchless invoices, great. I mean, so data is the fuel for fact to act. We do risk analytics, we drive the needles in the haystack for diagnosis and decision and take action. So let's have a final poll for you. How mature is your risk analytics strategy? So five answers. One is risk analytics consistently embedded in all risk disciplines, risk analytics in use in some areas, pilot underway, plans being developed, no plans. Where are you? I think you probably know that. So 10 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at what we got. Risk analytics use in some areas, so half of you. That's good news. 10% of you are piloting, quarter of you are planning, 7% of no plans. I'd certainly think you should be considering, because without risk analytics, you have no fact to act, and with no fact to act, you have no effective risk management. So that's very interesting feedback. Thank you for that. Right. So moving on, the fifth cornerstone, technology. Yeah, technology is central. Now, it is transforming all of our business processes, and here's an example, a source-to-pay example with RPA and connecting suppliers and customers through portals to our processes and predictive analytics. So all this is happening in our processes. What's happening in risk management? So what's happening in risk management, as in every other element of business, is we're faced with this robotic future of all of these different buzzwords. You know, these things have great potential, without a doubt, but you'll hear a lot about cognitive this, augmented that, and it's wonderful. And sometimes you need to be very careful that we take opportunities, but we take them with realism, not just blind faith. And Hans's discussion about the Gartner hype cycle on the bottom right there, that hump, that the peak of inflated expectations is one of the biggest barriers to progress. So if there's one thing we do in our lives, we want to try and chop the top off that inflated expectations and make a fast track through to the slope of enlightenment and a plateau of productivity. So these technologies all have value, but work out where they fit. So HFS research has done some interesting simplification of this, and I like this, and because there's a lot of focus on robotic process automation as an execution efficiency strategy. There's a lot of focus on smart analytics as a decision-making effectiveness strategy, and a lot of focus on AI as the driverless future. Now, AI is a platform, really. It's a platform technology, and as business people, we shouldn't really have to worry too much about that. It should become to us like electricity or mobile communications. It's there where it's useful, but we don't need to understand how. Now, obviously, in the current world, everyone's trying to tell us how important it is. So I would advise you to think about the transaction execution, the RPA and other technologies, and smart analytics in terms of giving us insight into making right decisions. Those are going to be infused with platform technologies like AI. So if I move on and give you an example of what you need to think about, is if you look at what you need to do from governance, risk management, compliance, and assurance, there's some things we have to do in terms of business. We have to prescribe and prevent things, and that's a very compliance-oriented focus. So most compliance regimes require you to demonstrate you are in control by a rules-based approach, and that's fine. Then there's broader views about guiding and detecting, principle and policy driven, which are not necessarily compliance focused, so we can take a broader view. And on the outside circle, we're talking about how to observe and correlate insight, get really interesting insights about, based on the nature of data. This is, again, fact to act and risk analytics. But what's important about this is when you look at classes of technology, you've got to work out where you're applying the technology. So rules-based technologies, classic automation, classic GRC, classic robotic process automation, RPA, that's rules-based. At the other end of the extreme, we still need rules, but data-based, looking at data, machine learning discipline of AI is all about not dealing with rules, but understanding the nature and behavior of data in large volumes. Now that's great, and it's very powerful at the outside circle, but it's not going to help you very much in prescribe and prevent. So my point is, make sure you don't believe all the marketing hype and work out you apply the technologies to the right places. So, are we going to have a driverless GRC anytime in the near future? Well, not in our lifetime, and probably not in anybody's lifetime, because GRC is about decision-making, informed decision-making for principal performance. So that's given you some thoughts on these 5 cornerstones. Hans is going to talk to us now just about how do we harness the best of what we have. Hans.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we don't start from scratch. We have invested a lot over the years in our GRC solutions, and there is value in there. Might even be future value, and there might, of course, be some elements that need to be changed. What I want to show you is that there are 4 elements that you need to assess to see where you are and where you should go. First of all, look at your process. This is an example as a straw man of a nicely 360 degree that you can read clockwise to see how this strawman organization is defining at executive level the risk strategy, translating that into a controls and compliance model, an IT GRC team doing the ropes, coming back with exceptions that are nicely resolved, and in the end lead back to an update possibility of the risk strategy and principles. So essentially it shows the who, what, and when, and gives you an enormous insight what is happening in your organization. You find your right stakeholders, and all of them you find your gaps, and at least you have a common picture to talk about. The second element is to think about your governance, risk, and compliance and assurance areas. Where are your systems, procedures, protocols, etc. Currently embedded in your organization? What do they do? Can we group them? Can we relate them? Can we say something about the good, the bad, and the ugly? And the result is something you could plot in the example that you see on this slide, where you can see all the influencing elements that make up this complex governance, risk, and compliance landscape, from the sourcing elements that give you the underlying data, to the grouped layers of targets that you want to achieve, to the types of technology that are supporting that. Again, creating insight by mapping your world in this area will help. And after the process and the areas, we of course have to look again at the data. We need a clean topology covering all processes and all areas that we have found during our assessment, with clear definitions, and if there are differences in definitions or there are synonyms, let's make them clear to all the stakeholders involved, so that they know when we talk about A, somebody else talks about B, we are meaning having the same meaning for those two things, and we not differ in our opinion about them. So this exercise will give you a nicely overview of all data produced and used by all processes and all areas. And then finally, when you have your processes, your areas, and your data inventory ready, you can define the gaps, the unknowns, and the deficits that you found during those assessments, and translate them into the anticipated demand that was stated to you. In fact, you're looking for the appetite to change. And the second element in there is then you structure the change by setting up a roadmap, because you can't do everything at once. It's too costly, too complex, so you have to do it step by step. And you look for priorities, meaning sponsorship for change. In which order are we getting the funds to move to this brave new world?
Thanks, Hans. So we're just coming to the conclusion now. If you haven't asked your questions, ask them now online. So with all of that insight about the challenges, the case for action, the new elements, and how we assess what we have, what are potential actions that you can take? What can I do today? Well, I think there's 4 key things. I think enterprise risk management, as I mentioned, has come of age. Those of you who are not deeply in it, I think a readiness assessment alignment, think about doing that. It's absolutely, it's nothing else. It raises the dialogue about risk management performance in the organization. So I would encourage you to consider doing that. We're available to help you if you would like, but I'm sure you can get help in many areas. Second one, Hans has just talked about, is GRC landscape assessment and review. I think it's absolutely key for anybody. Once you have a growing environment of components, as Hans indicated, and many of you have said you have over 10 elements, it's worth working out how you move forward and what the strengths and weaknesses are. The end-to-end GRC process mapping, I talked about this. You can do that yourself from you can work out some of the questions based on those 9 themes. We can help you with it, but I encourage you to do that because process effectiveness is what makes this risk management work. And in risk analytics, just do it. If you're not doing it, start doing it, extend your pilots, because without that, you can't do fact to act, and fact to act is the future. So I appreciate we're running out of time, probably running over, but I'd just like to think about, there's time for thinking and time for doing, and I do like this book. The Basti Sharan book is a staple, and it is just focusing on the fact that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and we need to get on and do things. So there's a bit of a thought for you. So we've covered a few things with you. I hope you found this useful. It's certainly been interesting sharing it with you, and I've been fascinated by your responses. And we have, if you haven't put the questions into the interface now, you can always email us. Even if you've got observations or broader questions or stimulated thoughts, send us an email. We are overrun, but I've definitely got to give you the benefit of at least a couple of these questions that come through. Right, hang on. Oh, okay. So first question is, what is the deliverable of the GRC landscape assessment you describe? Hans, do you want to take that?
Yep, that's fine. Well, you get your first deliverable is finding consensus and clarity on the end-to-end process and the data concepts and the supporting technology. You would be surprised how unknown often is what the neighbor is doing with their Stovepipe GRC systems, what the aim is, what the strong points and the weaknesses are. Yeah. So that is first thing, is clarity and consensus. The second thing is, based on that, if you combine all those opinions and ideas and requirements and demands, it gives you a heat map, where to focus, what can be reused, what can be refined, what can be extended, or what is maybe obsolete. So those 2 things, clarity, consensus, and a heat map.
Thanks very much, Hans. There's a bunch of questions here. We're just going to do one more because I'm concerned we're over time. But this question is, do you have a standard best practice risk analytics that you can apply? So I would say, yeah, we do have best practice library of risk analytics by process, but I think it's important not just assume this is a technical job. The key thing is establish what the relevant risks and performance measures are to the business processes in question. So the value is about buy-in, acceptance, and use of analytics to make decisions. Yes, we do, but I think there's more to it than that. A quick risk assessment based on processes is key, and then you can apply the analytics. So apologies for taking more than the allotted 45 minutes. I'd like to thank you for your time. Really appreciate you taking time out. And thank you. Ask us any questions by email now, because I think the polls are closed. Appreciate all your input. Have a great day. Thank you.